What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show here. It is Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday, end of the week here. A lot of stuff to take care of and talk about. And Brett is in our control room here and keeping us out of trouble and answering the phones. The lines are open, 877-342-6673. That's 877-342-6673. And just before we get into the show here, we have been under one of the most amazing thunderstorms here on the island of Oahu that I can recall. My wife and I, we've lived here for something like over 11 years. And it's never been like this before, and it was just thunder and lightning and ground strikes. We had one hit just down the hill here between us and the golf course. I'm going to go see if I can, see where it actually hit here after the end of the show. And it was just absolutely amazing stuff. But the power's been going up and down all day. Now, at the moment, it seems kind of calm, but I mention this only because, we are out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and the weather's really kind of wild. And if we lose our signal and our show and they go to a rerun, that is why. It's not because I don't like you. I don't need you. Please don't sulk and start crying and everything. It's just that we do get interrupted by the weather out here from time to time, and little things like tsunamis and stuff that, erupting volcanoes and all the other things that make life in Hawaii, very interesting. But I do mention this because I want to point something out. I have never seen this much lightning here in Hawaii in all the years that I've lived here. And in order to have lightning, you must have ice in the atmosphere. And I know the global warming cult is saying, the global warming is making severe storms. Well, technically, it's a temperature differential that makes for heavy weather. That's why you have hurricanes on places like Jupiter and Saturn, which are very, very cold. And Vikings spotted these little thin tornadoes dancing across the surface of Mars. So it isn't just heat, it's differential. And in order to have the lightning that we're seeing here, there must be a lot of ice up there in the air. So Al Gore, you were wrong again here. Now, interesting news that broke just before we went to airtime. The House of Representatives, rather amazing. Remember we were talking yesterday about how Dennis Kucinich brought this measure for a vote that would have required the U.S. government to end their involvement in the Libya operation. And Republican leaders refused to let it come to the floor for a vote because they were afraid it might actually pass. And then that would be the law of the land. And, Obama, of course, could have vetoed that and said, yes, we're going to keep sending, bombs and anything else over to Libya. Today, the House passed a measure, basically, I guess it's a sense of the House resolution telling President Obama that he has, in fact, violated his constitutional chain of authority by committing U.S. troops to the military mission in Libya after the expiration of the time that he has under the War Power Act. Now, remember, there was this little story where he had supposedly signed the bill for the extension of the Libyan war, but it turned out it was done with a robo-signer. And under the Constitution, the president may not delegate the authority to sign a congressional bill, either to a subordinate or certainly not to a machine. The only time anybody else can sign a bill into law is the vice president under the 25th Amendment when the president is incapacitated. And so, again, Obama, was this guy really a professional of constitution, a professor? Let me back up here. Rivero speaks, take two. Was this man, Barack Obama, really a professor of constitutional law during his academic career? And if he was, does he just simply not care that he is violating the Constitution left and right when he pulls these stunts? Anyway, nothing will come of this House resolution, but it does indicate that the House is going to stand up and at least, wag their finger at him, more so that in the coming 2012 election season, they can talk to their supporters and donors and potential voters and say, I got up there and I told him he was wrong. So vote me into office and I'll tell him he's wrong again. Anyway, getting back to the economy, which is what you really ought to be thinking about this coming election. And there's going to be no end to manufactured issues that the politicians and the media are going to try and throw in front of your eyes. Don't pay attention to all that stuff. This is what the election is about. The election is about gay marriage and gays in the military, and it's about And they'll come up with just all this kind of fringe stuff that they can campaign on. Because the incumbents understand very well, they certainly cannot campaign on the economy. They certainly cannot campaign on the conduct of the wars. They cannot campaign on their handling of the Gulf oil disaster, or the Fukushima disaster, or the flooding of the Great Plains, all that toxic industrial waste pouring into the land that used to grow our food, because of the neglected infrastructure. They can't run on the quality of the roads, so they got to find something they can run on, that they can make speeches about. And they're just going to be coming up with all this kind of stuff. So Rivero's rule of the news is, if it affects your life, it's news. And if it doesn't affect your life, it's fluff and distraction and propaganda. And, hey, look over here, don't look at the important stuff. And obviously what touches your life, most importantly, what should be the issue for you going into the 2012 election is the economy and how it's being dealt with. Now, Moody's is talking about downgrading the U.S. government's creditworthiness if a deal is not made on the debt ceiling. In other words, if the U.S. government does not agree to plunge all of you deeper into debt, Moody's is going to say that the U.S. government isn't as trustworthy with debt any longer. I wish we could get that deal. Go out and get another credit card and go deeper into debt and our credit rating improves. That's just absolutely amazing here. I mean, we're all told by all these little we'll get you out of trouble services you see advertising all over TV that if you lower your debt rating, your credit rating will go up. And yet Moody's is saying exactly the opposite thing to the U.S. government. If you don't plunge the American people deeper into debt, we're going to say that you're not a good credit risk. Moody's is also talking about cutting Bank of America, Citi, and Wells Fargo rating. And again, it's just another indicator that the economy is not in recovery, that, oh my stars and garters, the White House and Congress and the corporate media may be fibbing just a little teensy bit about what's going on, which brings me to this other story that came out today. The White House came out and said, we're ruling out a double-dip recession. You can imagine my relief. The president has said there will be no double dip. And, of course, he should know. What he's really saying is we're going to tell everybody not to talk about the double dip recession because the president can't stop it from happening, or he would have stopped the first one from happening. This is basically Obama is now in the same situation that George W. Bush was back in 2008. The economy is getting ready to unravel in a really bad way just before the next election. And so the White House is going to, it's just like they did last July in the Gulf of Mexico. The problem has gone away. Mahi dictum est. And we're all supposed to just politely nod and say, oh yes, the president says the problem is gone. So they're out there today saying the White House rules out the double dip recession, even as the housing prices, head on down again. And even the official unemployment rate is edging up higher and higher and close to that 10%. And the stock market took another beating because of it. Now, the job numbers for May came out, and they said, yes, the jobless rate is up, blah, 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 and they're still talking about it. But there's a lot of fudging going on there because there's this interesting little thing. I don't know if you're aware of this, but when they come out with unemployment numbers, to you and I, it would be really simple. We go out and we look at all the people who have filed for unemployment and don't have jobs, and we say, okay, that's the jobless rate. But the U.S. government complicates the matter. They'll recategorize people. If you've been out of work long enough, they'll put you in a different category. So they don't have to call you jobless and newly jobless. They put you in chronic unemployable and all this other stuff. And once you run out of your unemployment benefits, you're simply not counted at all. And so these unemployment numbers are not accurate. They're not reflective of the real degree of unemployment in this country because people who've been unemployed for a long time and have run out of benefits are not being counted any longer. And there's also this so-called statistical methodological adjustment, the birth-death adjustment. They have a fancy name for it called econometrics, which is a fancy name for we're going to fudge the numbers because we sort of think maybe they should be fudged. I mean, they're pulling these numbers out of the thin air. They're saying, oh, the numbers look really, really bad. But, they shouldn't look that bad because, in theory, we've got, so many people being born and so many people dying. And they just, they smoosh it around until they come up with a number that doesn't look quite so bad. And the reality is that this econometrics adjustment to May came to about 152,000 jobs or lost jobs. a negative. It's worse than the official number, because the official number, again, election season. They want to say, yeah, it's bad, but, it's not too bad. It's going to get better. They want you to live on hope for the future. And I'm tired of being told to live on hope. I don't want hope. I want a better future now, or I want somebody else in that job. And I'm tired of politicians making promises about how things are going to be better down the road if we'll just grin and bear being looted and abused today. Because it just gets worse. We're going to take a break for commercials. Join us on the air, 877-342-6673. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, over in Greece, where, there are a lot of very unhappy people because their government sold them all into debt without their permission. Same thing that happened in Iceland, same thing that happened here in the United States of America. And Greece is now looking for a bailout, which is they can't pay off their debts, so they're going to borrow more money from the IMF and the European Union Common Bank. And, of course, with that awareness of debt comes certain obligations and certain expectations from the bankers to Greece. One is that Greece will raise taxes on their people and cut services, all under the name of austerity. And will also pledge to turn over to the bankers, to the private corporations, public assets that the people of Greece either built themselves in ancient times, and it's their common heritage, or things that the Greek people paid for with their taxes earlier on. They're simply going to be taken away and given to these bankers who will turn around and then rent back to the Greek people that which used to be their own property. And the government says, oh, trust us, this is wise and prudent management, and this is the way it's supposed to be. And no, it isn't, because you cannot save your economy by going deeper into debt. The global economy under the IMF, any economy underneath a private central bank issuing a debt-based currency, it's like a small boat with 10 holes in the bottom, but only 9 corks. And all a bailout is taking a cork from one hole and then pounding it into another hole in full view of the media cameras and then charging somebody a fee for having done so. But as long as all the money in circulation is issued as a form of debt, then by default and by design, the number of holes in the boat will always exceed the number of corks. The boat must sink eventually, no matter how energetically you're swapping the corks around. All debt-based currencies are pyramids, and all pyramids collapse. And that's what's going on here. But what is the master plan is to enslave the entire world with this idea that we're obligated to the bankers by a debt of honor. And it's just the newest in a long line of myths and legends why we should do what the nobility tells us. In old times, it was the will of the gods. I rule by divine right. You must live your life in slavery to me because God willed it to be so. And then people sort of woke up to this idea that divine right was just a big fraud. And that God really did not say, yeah, this one guy gets to be king of all of us and we have to live in poverty and squalor, and do for him for whatever he says. So that kind of fell out of fashion. Then we had chattel ownership of humans, where somebody could come in and say, ooh, I will buy your child. And then the child grows up saying, oh, well, this other person owns me. I must do as I'm told. And we all know now that chattel ownership of our fellow human being is a hoax and a myth and a fraud. And it is not a real thing. It is an artificially invented construct. It is a belief. Like divine right. It's no more real than the belief in the Easter Bunny. It's no more real than the belief in the fat guy at the North Pole who brings you a bicycle. It is the myths and legends and beliefs that shape and control and enslave society. And this idea of compounding of interest on money that is nothing more than ink and paper is the newest variation on the theme. So your labor being obligated to the bankers when all the bankers had was ink and paper, it's a myth. It's another fake like divine right and chattel ownership of slaves. It's a hoax, and it works to create a sense of obligation only so long as you, the people, are willing to believe it is real. Beliefs are what enslave you. From our very earliest childhoods, we're bribed to allow belief to control us. Believe in Santa Claus, you'll get a bicycle. Believe in the bunny, you get candy. Believe in the tooth fairy, you get money. We're bribed to let belief control our minds. Don't think. Don't evaluate. Don't calculate. Don't analyze. Just allow belief. And then the rulers of society, the people who want to enslave you, will create beliefs for you. Belief in benevolent government. Belief in honest politicians. Belief in divine beings. And your personality grows up around those core beliefs until they become part of your identity. And you will talk to people who are slaves to belief. And you will find out the language gives them away. Because they don't walk around saying, I believe in the principles and tenets of the Republican Party. They say, I am a Republican. I am a Christian. They become that which is believed in. It becomes part of their personality and their identity. Which is why when you try and argue with people about the flaws in their beliefs, they'll react as if it's a personal attack, because in their mind it is. You're not attacking the principles of the Republican Party. You're attacking them personally because they are the Republicans. And it's a very, very powerful tool for controlling people. And this is just the latest variation on a theme. Divine right, chattel ownership of humans, compound interest. And that's what's going on. The people of Greece are beginning to wake up and realize that it's all a big, huge fraud to rule the world, to enslave us all with a myth, with ink and paper certificates. They're not real. It's not a real thing. It is a construct, an artificial invention. Like snake oil is what it is. It's snake oil mentality. Don't think, just believe that this is the way the world is supposed to be. We got that all in school. The myth about, the bank, you take your money in and you deposit it and they loan it out. And we all know as we grow up, that's not the way the banks operate. They're operating as legalized counterfeiting operations. For their own benefit, not for ours. Now then, we're coming to a commercial break here. So one more time, phone number is 877-342-6673. When we come back, I want to talk about this latest computer break-in and making public private details, because I'm beginning to smell a big fat rat here. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to talk about this latest hacking incident that's making the news. As you know, we had this whole thing with DirectNick and the domain name server hack a couple of weekends ago. And now all of a sudden we have this new group, the LulzSec hacker group, has broken into Sony, stolen the private details of more than 1 million people, and basically made the data public. Now, the overt explanation given by this hacker group is to prove how easy it is to break into these computers with simple attack. Well, hackers generally don't do that. They break in, they get credit card numbers, and they set up these payment bureaus where they can hit every one of the credit cards for like $1, because most people really don't look that closely at their credit card bills. And the hackers can make millions of dollars in fraudulent credit card charges, and most times they get away with it free and clear because people don't notice they're being ripped off for such small amounts, and the credit card companies don't want the information to be made public. So I'm beginning to wonder, we're seeing all these really spectacular, newsworthy computer hacks come out pretty much at the same time when Barack Obama is pushing for his new cyber security initiative. Remember what I said earlier in the show? He can't run on the economy and the wars and the Gulf oil disaster. He's got to make an issue. He's got to create an issue that he can run on the next year, or he's toast. He's absolutely toast. And so this is going to be his big thing. Yes, I need another term to implement cybersecurity to protect your private information online. Well, if you want to protect your private information online, don't put it online. Go back to using cash. Don't have credit cards. Okay, we're back on the air now. So basically, and please forgive us and understand we've got rain going to the phone lines and all the rest of that stuff. So we're back and everything should be just wonderful for a little while at any rate. You know, the infrastructure is coming apart in this country. It's another symptom of the decline of the decline and fall of the American empire. So anyway, we're talking about this computer security initiative that Obama is trying to come up with. that he wants to use to basically go in and run his campaign on. It's one of the issues they can run on so he doesn't have to talk about the economy and the wars. But there may be more to it than that, because remember, the government is terrified of the Internet and the blogs and the alternative media. Obama's already had meetings with the top executives in Silicon Valley to try and figure out some way to prevent what happened in Egypt from happening here in the United States of America. They've got this huge operation where they've got this very expensive computer software they bought with your money, where they can create millions of artificial, phony, online identities that don't exist. They're phantoms. They're manufactured, and they send them out onto the social media and the blogs to say, yes, the government's doing a really wonderful job, and yes, we've got to go kill those gosh darn Arab Muslims. And it's propaganda, and it's jamming, and they're spending your money to present yet another lie to you, which, by the way, under the Constitution of the United States of America, the government is not allowed to lie to you. When it does lie to you, like Saddam's nuclear weapons, they're acting criminally, illegally, and unconstitutionally, and they delegitimize themselves. So I think what's going on with this latest Sony hack is they're trying to create a case. They're trying to create a public climate where the people are going to say, oh, please, Mr. Big Government, please save us from the mean old cyber criminals. You know, because up until now, they've been running wild all over the world and all over our bank accounts and our credit cards, and the government's priority is to shove their hands down the front of your pants at the airport. And Obama will say, yes, if you'll vote me back in, we'll bring security to the Internet, which will mean censorship. It will mean more government control over the Internet to make sure that you are only allowed to see what the government wants you to see. We're already running into this with these private, what are called the net nanny, cyber protection, website protection, let's protect the children, filtering setups. Apparently a couple of the cell phone companies that feed web pages to their to the smartphones are already blocking political websites, including my own. I get reports from all around the world saying, you know, T-Mobile won't let me connect to your website. They say that you're dangerous and you're evil and you dress funny and you smell bad and all those other things, and therefore we will not allow our cell phones to visit your website. And it's just a way of trying to keep from the public information the public needs to have to make good choices. Thomas Jefferson said the highest duty of any American citizen is to keep themselves fully informed so they can make good choices. Okay, that was loud. Alrighty now, I want to step back here to this story about this guy down in Pima County who was gunned down by the SWAT team. The guy's name is Jose Manuel Gorena. And apparently now it has come out that the police are finally admitting that, in point of fact, this gentleman did not fire on them first. That was the original story. That was the original story. Now they're admitting that, no, in point of fact, this guy never fired a shot. But the police, the SWAT team, with all their body armor and all their guns, still felt that they were under threat when they shot this guy and just shot him down. Now, according to his wife, who is finally getting out there and, you know, and getting out there in the public, you know, she's saying basically that when they opened the door after it had been pounded on by the cops, there was one of these SWAT guys already in a crouched position pointing the AR-15 rifle at Jose, and he said, I've got something for you, and pulled the trigger. Now, this is continuing to unravel, but the reason I brought that story up is because there's another story that happened down in Miami Beach, where the Miami Beach police shot a man to death in a hail of bullets on Memorial Day, and again appears to have been completely unjustified. And what happened is the police noticed that there was somebody taking a video of the shooting. And this story was reported in the Miami Herald. They interviewed this guy. The police basically grabbed the guy making a video, threw him on the ground, hurled insults at them, which I can't repeat over this radio, or the FCC will take away our license. And they basically took his cell phone, slammed it in the ground, stomped on it, then they put it back in his pocket to say, oh, it must have broken when he was resisting arrest. Fortunately, the videographer, knowing how police can be in these situations, had already removed the SIM card and hidden it on his party, which is why the video finally got out. But this is where we are at, in the police state, where the police will simply beat you up to make sure you don't videotape them committing crimes. We'll be right back.
We will not go down in the night without a fight. You can burn up our mosques and our homes and our schools, but our spirit will never die. We will not go down in Gaza tonight.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to talk a little bit about TSA and Homeland Security, because in the last couple of days, probably in response to this ever escalating outrage by the American people at the way we're being treated by TSA, to no avail whatsoever. They are not making us any safer. Harvard Business School did a study that showed that all of this intrusion at the airport and this abuse does not actually make us any safer. Even the Department of Homeland Security is saying security is no better with the TSA than it was with their predecessors prior to September 11th. Half the practice bombs still get through. They're too busy looting your iPods and dropping your laptops. So we're all of a sudden hearing that maybe TSA might back off a little bit because the American people have really reached the point of basically going down to the airport and pounding these people into the pavement here. And now we're hearing that the U.S. House of Representatives has voted to shave more than $1 billion off of next year's Department of Homeland Security budget as part of this deal they're trying to reach to raise the debt limit. Okay? And this sounds like a really good thing, but I'm going to tell you right now what we can expect. There will be a terror attack, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, by Al-Qaeda, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, so the Department of Homeland Security can stand up there and say, see, you need us. See what happens when you take our money away. Because that's the way politics works in the United States of America. You create a crisis, and then you grab as much money as you can to solve the problem, which you yourself created or made out of thin air. Global warming, being a perfect example of how this mechanism works. The world isn't warming. In fact, it's getting colder. We've had 3 rough winters in a row. It's mid-60s here in Hawaii today, which for June is very unusual. And I only have an approximation of the temperature because I've got a thermometer in my nice little Casio watch here, but it always says 98.6, so I guess it's broken. But it is. It's very, very, very cool here. Now, over in Israel, things are beginning to heat up there. Israel is almost on the very... In fact, I'm going to back up and say I think they're throwing a tantrum, because they're not getting their way regarding the Palestinian statehood issue at the United Nations. They're not getting their way regarding the Gaza blockade and the starvation blockade and the international push for aid. They're still very unhappy that Egypt has opened the border crossing into Gaza, although Egypt, apparently under extreme financial inducement from the United States of America, has kind of imposed more restrictions on that to kind of close off that door. Remember, what's going on here is very, very simple. Back in the 1950s, the Soviet Union imposed a starvation blockade on the city of West Berlin. And the idea was to starve the West Berliners into surrendering their own government and accepting Soviet rule through their proxy in East Germany. And it didn't work because the rest of the world got together and had the Berlin airlift and simply flew in enough food and supplies to keep the city functioning until the Soviet Union quit and allowed the road to open up again. That's exactly what Israel is doing to Gaza. Back in 2006, they had elections. They said, yes, we're bringing democracy to Gaza. We're going to let you have elections. And the Gazans elected Hamas. And Israel said, you can't do that. And they've imposed this starvation blockade on Gaza to get them to starve them into surrendering their elected government, Hamas, and accepting proxy Israeli rule through their puppet Fatah. But, of course, that's not working anymore because Fatah and Hamas have shaken hands and they say, we're actually going to have a nation of Palestine here. So Israel's kind of hoisted on their own petard here, but they're still trying to do this starvation blockade thing. And they're going to block the next aid flotilla, which is getting ready to sail later this month, including the Mavi Marina, which was the same ship that was attacked last year, which involved the death of a lot of people. And that whole, and Israel's just going to do it again. They're completely unrepentant. They're unashamed. Their attitude is, we can do whatever we want, and if you say no, then you're just a gosh darn anti-Semite, aren't you? Meanwhile, the people of Gaza, and remember, this is about starvation. It's not about Israel's security. It's not about a threat to Hamas honored a 6-month ceasefire with Israel, which Israel broke November 4th, 2008, during the election, when we were all distracted with Barack Obama's victory. Israel attacked without provocation and broke the 6-month ceasefire and launched cast lead. And it's not about Israel's security, because Israel could be secure. All they got to do is draw their borders and live within them and say, yes, Palestine has as much right to exist as Israel does, and all these problems would go away. But it's about starving the rest of the world into doing what Israel wants, which apparently, I guess, is starting to look like they're doing here in the United States of America. Starve all you Americans until you just admit that we're in charge of your country. But I digress. Israeli forces have bulldozed crops in northern Gaza. They're just, we're coming up here at the time of the year when people start harvesting the food they've been growing since spring. This is when they go out to the garden and they gather all the food to feed themselves. What does Israel do? Sends in the bulldozers to bulldoze the food growing in the field. Now, does that sound like the action of a nation that really wants to live in peace with their neighbors? Or is this the action of a nation that simply has this psychotic mindset that it's all supposed to belong to them anyway because the invisible man who lives in the clouds said so, and that anything that we do with bulldozers and flamethrowers and white phosphorus and snipers shooting school kids is acceptable behavior because, after all, it is God's will that we do this. And it's very frustrating. The American media will not report honestly on what's going on over there. The American media is always saying, oh, yes, Israel's right to do that. We've got to support Israel. No, we don't. We've got problems in this country that we should be taking care of. And I am absolutely angered that our media and our government continue to be obsessed about what's going on in Israel while completely ignoring the decline and fall of the United States of America. Now, just to show you how completely psychotic this whole Israel-Jewish thing is going on, over in France, there's an author, Antoine Bueno, who has come out, and the media is treating this as a serious story. I'm not kidding you. He's come out complaining that the Smurfs are anti-Semitic. You know, the Smurfs, the little tiny blue cartoon characters. I actually worked at Hanna-Barbera back when those were popular. I got to hang out with the voice of Smurfette at the company party. But this author is out there screaming the Smurfs are racist and anti-Semitic, and they enshrine Nazi and Aryan idealism. And this guy is serious, and the media is saying, oh yes, we've got to seriously look at the Smurfs. They're the new threat to Israel. And it's absurd. They're just desperate for something to complain about. And again, it's a distraction. Because they don't want you looking at Israeli bulldozers bulldozing the Palestinians' food in the farm fields. No, we don't want to report on that. The big news is the Smurfs support Nazism. It's, so I'm not surprised Israel's throwing tantrums. Because people just aren't paying attention anymore. Even Pat Robertson got bought. Okay? Pat Robertson is up there making a speech with the flag of Israel behind him. And he's screaming about how the Arab Muslims are the new Nazis, and we've got to go and kill them because they're the new Nazis. Now, Pat Robertson has made two very, very large mistakes. First of all, the Nazis were not Muslim. The Nazis were Christian. Hitler was a Catholic. He sang in the choir at the monastery of Lambach as a child. That's where he saw the swastika for the first time as a little architectural motif. Hitler had a deal with the Vatican called a Concordat, where he promised that he would make Catholicism the state religion of his new Nazi Germany. And he was aided by the papal nuncio, a guy by the name of Pacelli, who eventually became Pope Pius XII. Pacelli's also the same guy who was helping Franco with his dictatorship as well. And for the same deal, I will make sure that everybody is Catholic. No Protestants will be allowed. We'll slap them around. Actually, they did a lot worse than that. So that's his first mistake. The Nazis were never Muslim. They were Christian. And the second mistake he's making is, of course, that of the three nations, Iran, which is Islamic, Israel, which is Jewish, and the United States, which is officially secular but mostly Christian, Iran is the only one that's not invading other countries right now. And you talk about through the looking glass and being told that black is white and up is down and right is wrong. It's the United States and Israel that are the aggressors. It is the United States and Israel that are constantly invading other people's country and stealing their land and stealing their food and killing their children. And the media is constantly trying to convince you, and now Pat Robinson's trying to convince you, that the Arab Muslims, who have not done anything at all to us, are the villains. Remember when Hitler got his country marching into World War II, the lies they were telling about, all the evil Poles. Oh my goodness, they blew up our radio station at Gleiwitz, which, by the way, Hitler's own people did that. Or the Reichstag fire. And it was all a big bunch of lies to trick Germany into attacking other countries that had not been a threat to Germany. Just because Hitler wanted to go in and take them over and say, yeah, now all your taxes belong to us. And it's the same model all over again. They're following the same playbook. Dictatorship for dummies. Adolf Hitler. And they're playing the same game. And I would hope that all of you listening to this show are enough students of history to recognize what's going on. Even though history is not really taught very well in our schools. It's deliberately taught in a way to keep you from seeing the repetition of historical patterns. Name, place, date, name, place, date, name, place, date. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. And you leave the classroom thinking that you know history because you have a name, a place, and a date. And you don't. Because you don't see the cause and effect. History is not isolated incidents. It's a long, intertwined dance through time of cause and effect. And you are taught history in this name, place, date means so that you don't see cause and effect in history, so that you don't see cause and effect today, right when it's in front of your eyes. We're going to take a break for station identification and the news, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and finishing up on the situation about Israel throwing a tantrum. Rahm Emanuel, former White House Chief of Staff, brother of Ari Emanuel, who was Michael Moore's business manager, I might add, and basically longtime Washington inside players out there making public statements reassuring Israel that the United States does not really expect them to return to the 1967 borders, even though that's what Barack Obama said in his speech the other day. Now, Rahm may be right in that the United States is never going to suggest that Israel go back to their 1967 borders, but it's not his place to say. He's not White House Chief of Staff anymore. And even if he was White House Chief of Staff, it's not his place to say. That's Obama is supposed to make that statement. Rahm Emanuel is preempting the President of the United States of America from his mayor's office in Chicago, Illinois. And that really kind of gets to the point I wanted to make. Rahm Emanuel has a job. He's been elected by the people of Chicago to be their mayor. That's what he's supposed to be doing. And once again, we see American politicians abandoning and ignoring their constituents in order to obsess about Israel. Illinois has got a lot of problems. Chicago has a lot of problems. And that's what Rahm Emanuel was elected and is paid to take care of. Not get out there and start going on and on about whether or not Israel should go back to their 1967 borders. That's not his job anymore. It's a little bit above his pay grade. Now, this obsessive focus on Israel must stop. And as we head into the 2012 election, I want to share with you a very simple philosophy. And I want you this to be the touchstone as you plan who you're going to vote for. And I know it's a raw deal because you have to vote for the lesser of two evils, and the lesser of two evils is still evil, and it's a stupid way to run a country, but that's what we're stuck with right now. But just remember these words from now until the election. No government can serve two masters, and a government that serves Israel cannot serve the American people. A friend to Israel is therefore no friend of America. Right now, in the middle of what is now the greatest depression in American history, America needs leaders who will put America first, second, and third. And foreign countries and their needs and their foibles and their problems have to come way, way, way down the list of priorities. Isn't that what the American representative government is supposed to be doing, representing America and Americans? Instead of this constant jumping up and down and screaming, I can serve Israel better than you can. It's almost embarrassing to see, members of Congress trying to outdo each other on who can bow lowest to Tel Aviv. It's not your job. Your job is to take care of this country, and we've got problems. It's embarrassing. Meanwhile, AIPAC, the American Israel Political Affairs Committee, Public Affairs Committee, is praising the United States government for boycotting the United Nations Conference on Racism. Because after all, from Israel's point of view, the fact that the United Nations is very critical of the way Israel treats Arabs and Palestinians within its territory, that of course must be an expression of anti-Semitism. And so for the United States to not take part is a good thing. And as a reward, apparently, Israel is going to name one of the new illegal settlements after the president. So people who live in the settlement can walk around and saying, yes, I'm from idiot. I had another word to put in there, but again, they'll take away our radio license if we do this. Over in Syria, things are getting really kind of ugly. Syria has started shutting off the internet and social media sites in an effort to contain all of this unhappiness with the way the government is selling them into the slavery of the international bankers. And, of course, that was Mubarak's big mistake. Up until that point, where it was just political dissent and protest and demonstrations, everything was still kind of under control. Then Mubarak shut off the internet, and that's when people got furious. We have a saying that we have around here. We even sell it on a coffee cup. The fastest way to bring down a dictatorship is to force it to act like one where everybody can see it. And that was what Mubarak's big mistake was. The protesters in Egypt got him to act like a dictator. Everybody saw it, and that was the beginning of the end. Now it's the beginning of the end in Syria. Same thing. Gandhi used to say, the goal of a civil resistor is to provoke the response of the tyrannical government. Now, I want to talk a little bit about this E. coli outbreak that is all over Europe, and a lot of people have become very, very sick from this. There are 3 cases now here in the United States of America, and everybody's all upset because it's very contagious. It's an unknown strain nobody's ever found before, and worse, it seems to have genes in it which make it resistant to antibodies. Now, there's a couple of competing theories as to what's going on. One theory that satisfies Occam's razor is that this E. coli superbug outbreak is the inevitable natural result to the abuse of antibiotics in meat production. And that certainly is an issue. The meat that you eat at the store, unless you go to an organic farm where you know that these animals are being raised in the natural way, the meat, beef, chicken, pork are just soaked in chemicals, hormones, antibiotics, all kinds of chemicals. Synthetic bovine growth hormone is still a big problem in the United States of America. And, of course, they're dosed with antibiotics because in these factory farms where the animals are just crowded into these cages until it's time for them to be killed, any illnesses get in there will simply go through the entire herd overnight because of the close proximity that they're forced to live. So they dose them all with these antibiotics to keep them from getting ill, and the antibiotics wind up in the meat. And any illnesses that are not killed by the antibiotics eventually become resistant to the antibiotics. And that's one explanation. But there's another theory. Apparently back in 1986, those wonderful folks in biological weapons research here in the United States of America isolated the gene for the lethal factor of the anthrax bacillus and spliced it into an E. coli. So back in 1986, U.S. biological warfare scientists, I know I was joking about somebody dropping a beaker at the biological weapons lab, but apparently they have been working with weaponizing E. coli. And now we have this super E. coli. I mean, normally E. coli does not make you sick. You always have E. coli in your body, in your digestive system. In fact, your digestive system is dependent on it. You get sick only when you get a new mutated variation that is reproducing far more rapidly and using up too many of your body's resources. But now we've documented that, yeah, the U.S. government's been playing with weaponizing E. coli because it's highly contagious but normally harmless, and now they're figuring out ways to make it harmful. And as long as you're going to be doing that, make it resistant to antibiotics. So it's kind of alarming situation there. Now, one more. This is an interesting story. Over in India, at the University of Delhi, scientists have discovered that one of the standard modified genes used in genetically modified food crops damages the plants in ways that were not anticipated or even looked for. See, one of the problems they've discovered with genetically modified crops is they'll modify a gene to get a desired result. But what they don't look at is whether this modification has effects in other parts of the genome. They don't even bother looking. And very often they do. And what these scientists at the University of Delhi have found is this gene, and it's a commercial gene, it's already out there. It makes a protein that is toxic to insects. The insects will die when they eat parts of these genetically modified crops. And now, all of a sudden, this colony collapse disorder among the honeybees starts to make sense. Because the official story we get from the media is, oh, it's little mites, or it's certain this and certain that. But we see this continuous pattern where bees that are fed on organic crops do fine. They're not suffering from colony collapse disorder. But bees that are used to pollinate and make honey from genetically modified plants are the ones suffering this colony collapse disorder, where the entire hive simply dies off. Now, this is not new information, because a few years back, Nature magazine ran an article how pollen from genetically modified crops was killing monarch butterfly larvae, and was harmful to benign species. And this article was kind of brushed off to one side because, after all, the genetics industry is they're big bucks. We can't say anything bad about them, just like we couldn't say anything bad about, Deepwater Horizon or nuclear power. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. The phone lines are open, 877-342-6673. 877-342-6673. Brett's in the control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and answering your phone calls when you call in. Now, speaking of never saying anything bad about nuclear power, I'm going to say something bad about nuclear power. Specifically, over at Fukushima, the latest news there, TEPCO is now saying that the contaminated water is likely to overflow and start escaping from that emergency pool that they built as early as the 20th of this month. Here's the problem. Because the reactors melted down, and because the slag, not only from the reactors, but from the spent fuel rod cooling pools, are still generating heat from decay, and there have been indications fission is taking place. They can't just let it sit there and cool. They must keep pouring water onto it to keep it from heating up and melting down even further. And the water has to go someplace. And for a while, it was just flowing into the Pacific Ocean. Well, they tried to stop that by basically building this temporary storage pool, and they were going to bring in this system to clean the water, make the water nice and sparkly clean. And bottle it as Fukushima health water or something. I don't know, whatever they were going to do. But they didn't want it going into the Pacific because then it's going to wake up Godzilla and all sorts of bad things will happen. Well, they have not been able to get that plant built that is going to clean up the water. And the water's been accumulating, and now they've got this huge stockpile of water, and it's going to start overflowing and going back into the ocean in June 20th. And they really lost this one. They really, really messed this one up. And it's rather interesting. There was an article that came out today about why is the United States still committed to nuclear power? Well, the United States government is committed to nuclear power for several reasons. One is they don't want to back up and admit that they were wrong to go down that path. Second, the development of fission nuclear power plants is a cover for weapons development because the materials needed to build nuclear bombs can, in fact, come from nuclear power plants. The big issue that they're making over there in Iran regarding their power station. There's no evidence Iran is doing anything other than a power station. And, of course, Israel does not allow IAEA inspection of their reactor at Dimona, which even Israeli television admits they're building bombs down there. So a little double standard going on. So they need that, and they basically use the development of power reactors as cover for a lot of R&D for future weapons projects. Second, the United States does need a lot of electricity. The more electricity they have, the more they can run weapons factories, especially in times when they don't have enough oil. The whole Tennessee Valley project of dams and power stations was built in part to support the electricity that was needed for very early uranium enrichment using these gigantic magnetic assemblies called thaliotrons. And the electricity from these hydroelectric projects along the Tennessee Valley was where that all came from. So the United States needs that as well. And finally, of course, most politicians are heavily invested in General Electric, which makes a lot of money selling these reactors around the world. So we're getting this situation where the American media they're being forced to report on what's going on over in Japan, but they're definitely downplaying it and trivializing it. Now, getting back to the economy and this push to reach some kind of a deal to convince Congress to go ahead and raise the debt ceiling. First of all, I think it's pretty much obvious to everybody that there are certain things that are never talked about when they talk about we've got to cut costs, we've got to get the spending under control, and yet they never talk about reducing the spending for war, Pentagon, and defense. Which is, I don't know why we have a Department of Defense. We're not defending against anybody. We're attacking. We're invading. It's a Department of Offense. It's a department of let's run around the world killing the brown people and steal their oil. There's no defense. If it was a Department of Defense, we'd simply sit there with the missiles and say, you attack us, we nuke you. And that's very simple. We recycle all the tanks and jeeps and warplanes into razor blades and beer cans, and we go on about our business. We don't need the gigantic military projecting power into other countries for defense. Anybody attacks us, we nuke them. All of this other stuff, the aircraft carriers, the landing ships, the Aegis ships, it's all about projecting power into other countries to tell them, you do what we say. Starting with, you forget about all that money we borrowed from you a couple of years ago. Which seems to be about the only thing that's keeping Russia and China from selling all of their treasury debt. Just dumping it all at once, crashing the entire system. But the U.S. government cannot bring itself to cut any spending on the Pentagon. They certainly are not able to reduce any of the money that's pouring out of our country into Israel. And they certainly are unable to stop pouring more and more money onto Wall Street. So they talk about, cutting schools and hospitals and roads and so forth. And apparently, there is now an expectation that some 450,000 state and local government employees are going to get pink slipped in 2012. And the reason for that is very, very simple. The United States government, the federal government, takes tons and tons of money out of the states in taxes and has been sending back less and less and less. And the reason they do that is really very simple. The federal government has been offloading their debt onto the states to spread it around to conceal the true scale of the debt problem. We hear numbers like $7 trillion, $8 trillion federal government debt. The reality is it's much worse because they're not even admitting to the true scale, let alone including all the money spent to save Wall Street from the mortgage-backed security fraud. And what they do is they turn around to the states and say, yeah, send us all your money here and we'll give you a little bit back, and then they top it off with all these unfunded mandates, which drives the states into having to borrow, and now the states, because of tax revenues, they can't pay it back, and now they're going to have to start letting their people go. The whole country's falling apart. We'll be right back. And aloha, America, and welcome back to the show here. And just got a bunch of little stories here to go through toward the end of the show here. Apparently down in Orlando, members of the group Food Not Bombs were arrested when they were feeding the homeless in Lake Eola Park, and the police came by and said that they had violated a city ordinance. You are not allowed to feed the homeless people anymore. Not exactly sure where the homeless are supposed to be getting something to eat if, in point of fact, people are not allowed to help them out any longer. And, of course, I know what's really going on. Orlando wants them to go someplace else. That's basically where we are. If you go back and you look at the history of the second greatest depression, and you will see the photos of signs posted at town limits. Just keep walking. You know, if you don't have a job, you don't stop here. We'll run you out of town as vagrants and stuff. People didn't want to have to look at the poverty that was going on. People who'd gotten rich off of graft and corruption, and the money junkies didn't want to have to look at the human wreckage caused by their money junkie games, then and now. And that's what's going on. We have a lot of homeless people here on the island of Oahu. We have about 4,000 of them just living down here. There was this very interesting episode of Dog the Bounty Hunter, which I like to watch just to make sure I'm not on it. And I've met Dwayne a few times and gotten to work with him and interviewed him once for a show. And they did a segment for Dog the Bounty Hunter where they were looking for a fugitive at this little homeless camp. I shouldn't say little. Homeless camp along the north shore of what is called the Center Lock of Pearl Harbor. And if you look along that shoreline through Google Earth, you can see the tents poking through the trees. It's not as visible from overhead as it is walking along the ground. And I got to see it up close because there's a school right next to this homeless encampment that we used to use as a filming location for the TV series Lost. And when I wasn't otherwise occupied, I'd basically walk around back and just take a look at just, crates and boxes and tents and people just living there. And it's a huge, huge problem. And the state government and the people who seem to have the money to be able to do something about it, their attitude is, I don't want to look at them. Get them away from where the tourists are going to be. So in the middle of all of this homelessness and hunger and record Americans on food stamps, Michelle Obama and Agricultural Secretary Tom Vilsack have unveiled the new healthy plate. So remember when we were kids, we had the 4 basic food groups. You had to have a little meat, a little vegetable, a little fruit, and a little dairy. And then that was replaced with the food pyramid, which caused a lot of consternation because it de-emphasized the role of meat, and the Cattlemen's Association was up in arms, and they were screaming, and then so they fudged the line back over and said, yes, you need more meat, which basically says these charts are not really based on what's good for you. It's based on who screams the loudest, and who's got the most political clout, and who's writing the largest campaign donation checks. So anyway, they've decided to scrap the food pyramid and replace it with the healthy plate symbol, which, again, puts the emphasis onto fruits and vegetables, which means we're probably going to get more unhappiness from the meat producers' associations. But this is a totally pointless exercise, and I realize we're coming into an election season and they're trying to look like they're doing something. But the vast majority of Americans right now are eating whatever happens to be on sale at the market this week. Fresh fruits and vegetables are very scarce right now because the farmlands of America have been diverted to ethanol production, or they're suffering lower yields from the use of GM seeds, or they've been flooded by all this industrial waste because the flood control along the Mississippi has been allowed to rot away because they got to pour the money into the war. So this makes it look like Michelle Obama and Tom Vilsack are completely out of touch with what's going on out here in the real country. They're out there with their little decorations about healthy plates, and they're going to do little public service announcements and everything, and most Americans are going to look at that and say, is this lady that out of touch with how hard life has become in this country because of her husband's economic policies? And not that he gets the whole blame, but he was elected into office on this idea that he was going to change the course of the nation, and he didn't. According to the Hackett Group, the offshoring of American jobs, encouraged by tax credits to corporations, has accelerated under Obama. Not reduced, not changed, not turned around. It's gotten worse. Talk about rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. It's decoration. It really is. It's decoration. Most Americans right now do not have the luxury of picking and choosing what they're going to eat. They're anything they can get. And it may not even be all that healthy. Certainly there's a lot of American manufactured food that's not healthy at all, with all the chemicals and additives that are in there. But it's all they can afford right now. Now, getting back over to Greece, we were talking about Greece a little bit earlier where, big thunder just hit outside there. So hope we don't lose our power. Over in Greece, Moody's is talking, there's a 50-50 chance that Greece is going to default. They don't have enough money to meet their obligations. Most of those obligations being the manufactured debt to the private central bank or to the European Central Bank, which is just another Federal Reserve. And the lesson we need to get out there is that private central banks and debt-based currencies are designed to impoverish the people, enrich the bankers, and then crash. There is no debt-based currency that can sustain a nation. Everyone talks about sustainability with energy and sustainability about whatever. The economy cannot be sustained on a private central bank and a debt-based currency. We've had 3 of these setups, and all 3 of them have brought the nation to the edge of ruin. And yet the bankers keep finding politicians who are corrupt enough to just take the money and say, yeah, we'll give it another whirl, and heck, I'm going to be dead and gone before this one falls apart. I'm sure that's what everybody was thinking back in 1913. When they voted through the Federal Reserve Act and foisted what appears to be a bogus income tax on us all. And Woodrow Wilson signed it into law because that was the promise he'd made to be allowed to be president, is to sign the money-making, money-control power of the Constitution and the government over to the private bankers at the Federal Reserve. And he wrote in his own diary he destroyed the country. But, hey, it's not going to happen while I'm alive. I'm going to have my money. I'm going to have a really good time. It's going to be somebody else's problem to take care of. There was one good aspect to having a king that ran your country. He was stuck with the job forever. He didn't get to, do whatever he wanted now and say, oh, somebody else has to clean up the mess 5 years from now. We'll be right back after these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I don't know if you can hear this on the microphone or not. We've got another thunder shower coming on in, and it is really raucous, and it's shaking the walls, and we've had the power dip here. So in this last 15 minutes of today's show, if I suddenly seem to vanish from the ether, that's why. The power just dipped during the commercial break, and Very nerve-wracking here. All right, now I want to get back to this thing about the economy of Greece, of the United States, of Iceland, because the message we're getting with this word austerity, it's a very simple one. We're getting this from our government. We're getting it from the media. We're getting it from the bankers. You must make do with less because we must have more. And when you look at the people who are out there saying you must make do with less so we can have more, they've already got a lot of it. But they want that last little bit that you have. Because money junkies are like that. They don't judge their success in business by how well they make their entire society operate, but just by how well they do. They build temples to their own grandeur, and how much money they have and how many cars they have. That's how money junkies keep score. Henry Ford understood that the way to become prosperous was to make your community prosper around you. And we lost a very great deal of wisdom when we stopped remembering just how Henry Ford understood business and banking to operate. We may not like the cars as they are built by his successors, but we need to go back and look at his business sense and his sense of commitment to the community. Yes, it's a lot harder to make your entire community prosperous around you, but isn't that a much better reason to have a statue built to you than simply say, oh, wow, look how much money they've got. I want to be just like them. So we're talking about this austerity, which is a fancy word for you must make do with less so the bankers can have more. And the European Union and the IMF are already over in Greece saying, oh, austerity, austerity. You know, tax the people more, give it to us, give less back to them because that's what austerity is, and that's the only way we can save the banking system. And of course, that's a lie. That is a big lie. It doesn't matter how much you sacrifice. It doesn't matter how much you pay in taxes and how little you live on and how much you sabotage the future of your children. It doesn't matter because as long as we are operating on a debt-based currency, accumulating interest, there is no saving the system. There is simply the money junkies grabbing the real wealth of the nation for as long as they can until the whole thing comes falling apart, which is where we are right now. There is no amount of sacrifice that you can endure that will save the economy. There's no amount of taxes you can pay that will save the economy. It's just all a big hoax and fraud to get you to give them the last few pennies in your pocket. It's money junkie addictive behavior. They're trapped by their addiction. They can't change. They can't let go. They can't give anything back. I was watching that HBO film, Too Big to Fail, which is a really huge poo polish of Wall Street during this financial crisis. Because, yes, they do detail out a lot of the historical events that really happened. But this is a piece of propaganda because they're attempting to portray everybody in Wall Street as just trying to do the best they can under some really bad circumstances. And they never talk about the criminality that companies like Bear Stearns were caught engaging in. They never talk about the money junkie behavior. You know, they try and sell the idea that, yeah, the Wall Street people have to have record pay and record bonuses because otherwise they'll leave. These are the people who destroyed the economy. Why would we want them to stay? And it's all a dodge. It's all snake oil. And we need an intervention. And for those of you out there listening to my show who are struggling with just keeping a roof over your head, keeping food on the table, don't blame yourselves for this, because you didn't do anything wrong. This was done to you. You are the victim of a predatory financial system imposed on the country almost 100 years ago without the permission of the people. Congress voted it through. Woodrow Wilson signed it. It was a done deal. And the people of the United States of America had nothing to say about it. And ever since then, the schools have just gone out of their way to teach you that, yes, the Federal Reserve is the way banking has always been. And it isn't. It's not the banking system the country started with. And they go on teaching you that, yeah, this little piece of metal that's copper on the inside and colored silver on the outside, it's just as good as the quarters that your grandfather knew. And no, it isn't. It's like George Orwell's 1984. We've always been at war with East Asia. We've always had clad coinage. No, we haven't. We had gold and silver in our pockets. The paper was just a claim check for it. The paper had no worth. We understood it had no worth until we took it to the bank and got the silver and gold. We were scammed, and it was done to us before we were born, before we ever had a chance to say yes or no on it. And when you have a political system that traps its citizens in debt before they're old enough to vote, when we tell each succeeding generation, this is your debt, you have no choice but to pay it, that's indentured servitude. That's slavery. That's not a free society. When we're all born into this accumulated debt passed forward by government after government after government, and they say, yeah, this is yours. This is your your civic duty is to work your life away and pay off this debt for money that was spent before you were even born. That is slavery. Remember what I said before? It's all a hoax to give you a sense of obligation to the masters, to the nobility. You must work for them because of divine right. You must work for them without question because they own your physical body. You must work for them without question because of accumulated compound interest in a system that can never, ever, ever be paid off. And that is the absolute most important lesson you need to understand about the Federal Reserve System. Because once the nation was sold into its bondage, there is no getting out. All new money created to service a loan simply increases the debt. New money is created by new loans to pay the interest on the old money, but the aggregate debt continues to increase and is always, always larger than the available money supply. There's no way to pay it back. And that is the trap. We're born into debt to the Federal Reserve. We will die in debt to the Federal Reserve unless we decide that we've had it with the Federal Reserve. And like Andrew Jackson or Abraham Lincoln or John F. Kennedy, we say, you know, you guys have made enough money off of us. We don't know how much money they've made. They threatened to crash the system if Ron Paul went forward with his plan to audit them. But we don't know. They lie left and right. They fought tooth and nail not have to tell us who was getting all this money. Trillions and trillions of dollars going out there. And now we understand. They're admitting there was criminality. We've got Alan Greenspan admitting that fraud and criminality were at the heart of the economic crash.
Things were being done which were certainly illegal and clearly criminal in certain cases, fraud is a fact. Fraud creates very considerable instability in competitive markets. If you cannot trust your counterparties, it won't work. And indeed, we saw that it didn't.
Now, that was Alan Greenspan on the stage speaking during this sort of commemoration they had last year at a place called Jekyll Island, where they were celebrating the 100th anniversary of the creation of the Federal Reserve, a private bank that took over, commandeered, grabbed control of the U.S. monetary system, not for the benefit of the American people, but for the benefit of the bankers. They hijacked the money system of the United States of America. And Greenspan is up there admitting on stage, yeah, there was fraud and criminality, but you never saw that mentioned in this HBO documentary, Too Big to Fail. It's a piece of propaganda. The film you should all be seeing, and it's a shame it's not on TV. For some strange reason, the corporate media doesn't want to play this for you. But it's called Inside Job. It won the Academy Award for Best Documentary this year. And it's being shoved under the rug. They don't want you to see that one. HBO rushes out this other one to say, here's what really happened. And the people on Wall Street, they weren't really villains and con artists and criminals. They were victims along with everybody else. And it was just something that happened all by itself, and nobody really knows, and nobody's to blame. So if it's Inside Job is available at Netflix, get it and look. That's your homework. There's going to be a pop quiz next week on this one. But you need to watch that. That is the one that every classroom in America should be shown as to what really went down, why the economy was destroyed. The money junkies went out with the biggest financial swindle in history, and they got caught. And instead of going to jail, they went to their buddies, the government, and said, we'll just get the American people to pay for all of this stuff. And that's exactly what happened. And they looted all the money they could from you to buy back all this bad paper from banks and investment companies around the world. And when there wasn't enough money, they started stealing houses. It's wealth confiscation. Roosevelt did the same thing with gold in 1933, just taking it away from the people and giving you pieces of paper and ink in its place to give to the banks to save the banks. And now Obama and Bush and Wall Street are doing it again. It's wealth confiscation. They're taking the wealth that you worked for to buy their way out of this fraud called the mortgage-backed security so that they can go on making billions and billions of dollars without having to work or produce anything for it. Because if you look at Wall Street and what it's become, they don't make anything. They don't create anything. They simply sit astride everybody else's labor and say, we're in control because we decide where the credit will go and where it won't go. And if we try and set up commerce without them, they send the thugs to say, no, you must enslave yourself to our paper notes. They're the only legal way to do things. Think about that over the weekend. We're going to be back on Monday here on the Rense Radio Network. So have a good weekend. Stay safe, stay well, stay angry, stay skeptical. And aloha, America.